The emergency call sounded like a script, delivered with a frantic energy that felt rehearsed. On a freezing January evening in 2020, Letecia Stauch reported her 11-year-old stepson missing, claiming he had simply wandered off into the Colorado dusk. But while she played the role of the distraught parent for the cameras, spinning a web of kidnappers and runaways, the boy's blood was already drying in a bedroom she had scrubbed clean. This wasn't a search for a lost child. It was a hunt for a body hidden inside a suitcase, driven halfway across the country by the woman who called herself his mother. Help this channel grow. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more cases. This helps us a lot. Thank you. To understand the tragedy that unfolded in the quiet suburbs of Colorado Springs, one must first look at the light that was extinguished. Gannon Stauch was more than just an 11-year-old boy. He was a soul described by everyone who knew him as Gannon the Great. Born 3 months premature and weighing only 1 pound and 6 ounces at birth, he was a survivor from his very first breath. He carried that resilience into a childhood defined by kindness, a high-pitched, infectious giggle, and a genuine desire to help others. Gannon was the kind of child who didn't just play with his toys, he shared them. He didn't just attend school, he looked out for the kids who sat alone. In the Stauch household, he was the helpful big brother, the energetic son who loved Sonic the Hedgehog and dreamed of a future filled with the same boundless energy he brought to every room. The family's journey to Colorado was supposed to be a chapter of stability and new beginnings. Al Stauch, Gannon's father, was a man of service, a member of the Army National Guard whose career often required him to be away from home for training and deployments. It was this sense of duty that eventually brought the family to the Lorson Ranch neighborhood, a community of neat, beige homes and wide streets where children's bicycles were common sights on the sidewalks. Al was a devoted father, though his military obligations meant he had to rely heavily on the person he chose to help him raise his children. That person was Letecia Stauch. On the surface, Letecia was an ideal partner for a man in Al's position. She wasn't just a stepmother, she was a woman who boasted an impressive resume in the field of education. Letecia presented herself as a highly intelligent, career-driven professional who held a PhD and had spent years working within various school systems. She often spoke of her passion for teaching and her commitment to child development. In her telling of her own story, she was a dedicated educator who had navigated the complexities of the South Carolina school system before moving to Colorado. She projected an image of a woman who could manage a household with military precision while providing the nurturing environment Al's children needed while he was away. The digital footprint Letecia left behind painted a picture of a woman deeply invested in her family's perfect life. Her social media profiles were filled with the typical hallmarks of suburban bliss. Photos of family outings, celebrations of the children's achievements, and posts that emphasized her role as a loving, supportive mother figure. To the outside world, and even to Al, she was the glue holding everything together. She was the one coordinating schedules, making sure homework was finished, and managing the day-to-day chaos of a home with 2 young children. However, beneath this meticulously crafted mask, the reality was far more jagged. Letecia was a woman who craved validation and felt a simmering resentment toward the very life she had worked so hard to project. While she claimed to have a doctorate and professional accolades, investigators would later find that much of her brilliance was a house of cards, a series of exaggerations and outright fabrications designed to elevate her status in the eyes of others. She wasn't the contented homemaker she appeared to be. She was a woman who felt burdened by the responsibilities of being a stepmother. As 2019 transitioned into 2020, the atmosphere inside the house at 6633 Mandan Drive began to sour, though the change was largely invisible to Al during his periods of absence. Letecia began to express a growing sense of isolation and bitterness. In her mind, she wasn't a partner in a loving marriage. She was a servant to a family that didn't appreciate her sacrifices. She complained about the housework, the constant needs of the children, and the lack of support she felt from Al while he was away on duty. This resentment wasn't just a private struggle. It began to leak out in her digital communications. She would search the internet for topics that hinted at her inner turmoil, looking for ways to move back to South Carolina, researching "I hate my stepkids," and seeking out validation for her feelings of being overwhelmed and mistreated. The disparity between the Dr. Stauch she presented to the world and the bitter, volatile woman behind closed doors was becoming a chasm. She was a performer who was growing tired of her role. Gannon, with his high needs and energetic personality, became the focal point for much of this redirected anger. To Letecia, he wasn't a miracle baby who had overcome the odds. He was an obstacle to the life she felt she deserved. She began to view his typical childhood behaviors through a lens of extreme frustration. Every spill, every broken item, and every moment of required attention became a personal affront to her. Al Stauch remained largely unaware of the depth of this darkness. Like many parents who serve in the military, he trusted his spouse to be his eyes and ears at home. He saw the photos she sent. He he heard the updates she provided over the phone. He believed the woman he had married was the same woman who was tucking his children into bed at night. He had no reason to suspect that the perfect stepmother was actually a woman who was increasingly detached from reality and fueled by a toxic mix of narcissism and rage. By the time January 2020 arrived, the stage was set for a confrontation that no one could have predicted. Letecia was a woman on the edge, her patience exhausted and her mask slipping. She was looking for an exit, a way to reclaim her life from the perceived drudgery of motherhood and the demands of a husband she felt neglected her. Gannon, innocent and unsuspecting, was living in a home where his protector had quietly become his most dangerous adversary. The quiet streets of Lorson Ranch were about to be shattered by a crime so calculated and cruel that it would challenge the community's very understanding of the maternal bond. The psychological landscape within the house on Mandan Drive was far more fractured than any onlooker could have guessed. While the suburban aesthetic suggested a harmonious blended family, the reality was a slow-motion collision of Letecia's fragile ego and the demands of children who required genuine emotional labor. Letecia didn't just want to be a mother. She wanted the status of being an elite mother without the actual sacrifice. She had constructed a life built on the sandy foundation of prestige, frequently reminding those around her of her advanced education and her supposed intellectual superiority. To Letecia, the world was a stage where she was perpetually undervalued, and her home was the place where she felt this perceived disrespect most acutely. When Al was home, Letecia maintained the performance. She was the supportive military spouse, the one who kept the wheels turning. But as soon as Al departed for National Guard training, the atmosphere shifted. The mask didn't just slip, it was set aside in favor of a cold, transactional approach to parenting. Letecia began to keep a mental ledger of every perceived slight from Gannon and his sister. In her mind, the children were no longer family members to be nurtured. They were responsibilities that prevented her from achieving the greatness she felt entitled to. This resentment was meticulously documented in her digital life, a realm where she felt safe to vent the toxic thoughts she hid from her husband. Her search history from late 2019 and early January 2020 serves as a chilling map of a mind turning toward darkness. She wasn't just searching for parenting tips, she was looking for justifications for her growing hatred. She looked up phrases like, "I hate my stepson," and finding a way to leave my husband without losing everything. She was a woman trapped by a life of her own making, and she began to project the source of her misery onto an 11-year-old boy. Gannon, by all accounts, was a sensitive child. He could sense the temperature in a room change, and the temperature in Letecia's presence was often freezing. Witnesses later recalled that Gannon seemed increasingly on edge when Al wasn't around. He became quieter, more withdrawn, as if trying to shrink himself to avoid becoming a target for Letecia's volatile moods. This was the silent power struggle the world wouldn't see until it was too late. Letecia viewed Gannon's very existence as a drain on her resources, her time, her money, and her emotional energy. She complained to friends and family in South Carolina that Al's children were difficult and unruly, painting a picture of herself as a long-suffering martyr dealing with impossible circumstances. The manipulation of Al's trust was perhaps the most calculated part of the dynamic. Letecia knew exactly what to say to keep him at ease. She would send him cheerful updates, photos of the kids smiling, and messages about family time that were often complete fabrications. She understood the psychology of a man in the military. He needed to believe his home front was secure so he could focus on his duty. Letecia exploited this necessity, using Al's absence as a shield to hide her deteriorating mental state and her escalating cruelty. Behind the closed doors of the Stauch home, Letecia's Dr. Stauch persona was replaced by a woman who would engage in hours-long tirades, often over trivial matters. She would record Gannon on her phone, trying to catch him in misbehavior to prove to Al that the boy was the problem. These videos, which would later become crucial evidence, showed a disturbing power dynamic. An adult woman looming over a small, clearly distressed child, badgering him with questions and demanding he admit to faults he often hadn't committed. It was psychological warfare, and Gannon was outmatched. Her resentment also had a financial component. Letecia was obsessed with money and the lifestyle it could provide. She viewed the expenses associated with the children, from clothing to extracurricular activities, as money that was being stolen from her. She felt that Al prioritized his biological children over her desires, a thought that fueled a burning narcissism. She wanted a life of luxury and freedom, and the reality of a middle-class existence in Colorado Springs with 2 children felt like a prison sentence. In the weeks leading up to January 27th, Letecia's behavior became increasingly erratic. She was frequently absent from her job, often without notice, and spent more and more time isolated in her room or out on long, unexplained drives. Her nanny and housekeeper duties, which she had once boasted about, were now neglected. The house was no longer a home. It was a pressure cooker. The children were living in a state of hypervigilance, never knowing which Letecia they would encounter. The one who ignored them, the one who lectured them, or the one who seemed to be simmering with a quiet, terrifying rage. Letecia's ego demanded that she be the center of the universe. When Gannon required attention, whether it was for help with schoolwork or just the basic needs of a growing boy, she saw it as an intrusion. She began to develop a victim complex so profound that she truly believed she was the one being abused by the situation. In her twisted logic, any action she took to correct the children was a form of self-defense. This dehumanization of Gannon was the final stage of her psychological descent. Once she stopped seeing him as a child and started seeing him as a monster or a burden, the moral barriers to violence began to crumble. The perfect family image on social media remained the only thing that was consistent. Even as she was searching for ways to move back to South Carolina and leave the family behind, she was posting photos of Gannon, calling him her boy. This duality is the most haunting aspect of the Stauch family dynamics. It was a house where love was used as a weapon and a mask, and where the most dangerous person in Gannon's life was the one his father had trusted to protect him. The community of Lorson Ranch saw the beige house and the happy photos, but inside, a storm was brewing that was about to turn into a nightmare from which Gannon would never wake up. Letecia had become an actress who was no longer satisfied with her script. She wanted a new life, a clean slate, and she was beginning to believe that the only way to get it was to eliminate the obstacles in her path. She was no longer just a disgruntled stepmother. She was a predator waiting for the right moment to strike, convinced that her intelligence and her ability to manipulate the truth would allow her to get away with the unthinkable. Monday, January 27, 2020, began as a frigid, nondescript morning in Colorado Springs, the kind where the breath hitches in the throat and the sky remains a bruised, heavy gray. But inside the beige house at 6633 Mandan Drive, the atmosphere had already begun to putrefy. The true Day X didn't actually start at sunrise. Its seeds were sown the night before, on Sunday, in a bizarre and calculated prelude. Letecia had reported a fire in Gannon's bedroom, claiming the boy had been playing with a candle and accidentally scorched the carpet. It was a classic Letecia maneuver, creating a small, controlled crisis to justify a larger, darker deviation from routine. She used this accident as the leverage she needed to tell Al that Gannon was unwell, that he was upset, and that he would need to stay home from school the following day. When Al Stauch pulled out of the driveway at approximately 5 a.m. that Monday, heading for his National Guard training in Oklahoma, he believed he was leaving his son in the safest hands possible. He left behind a quiet house, a sleeping 11-year-old, and a wife who had promised to manage the household. He couldn't have known that the moment his taillights faded into the distance, the countdown to a massacre had reached its final seconds. The morning hours were a haunting study in domestic silence. At 10:13 a.m., the narrative of the sick child was captured on a neighbor's nest surveillance camera. The footage is grainy, but the weight of it is soul-crushing. It shows Letecia's red Nissan Titan backing out of the garage. Gannon is visible, a small figure in a hoodie, walking with a slow, agonizingly heavy gait toward the passenger side. He doesn't look like a child excited for a day off. He looks like a boy who is already broken, his movements sluggish and pained. Investigators would later wonder if he had already been drugged or injured during the candle incident. Letecia drives away, supposedly to take him to find a replacement for the burned carpet. But when the truck returns at 2:19 p.m., the camera captures a very different story. Letecia pulls into the garage, but Gannon is nowhere to be seen. He had entered that truck a living child. He returned to that house as a secret. The window between 2:19 p.m. and the early evening is where the darkness becomes absolute. Inside the master bedroom, a space that should have been a sanctuary, the actress finally dropped her mask for the last time. There was no audience, no social media followers to impress, only the raw, unchecked vanity of a woman who had decided that a child's life was an acceptable price for her own freedom. The struggle was not silent, though the thick walls of the suburban home muffled the horror. Gannon did not go quietly. He fought with the desperate, fading strength of a survivor, but he was trapped in a room with a woman who had armed herself with the cold precision of a predator. The reconstruction of the attack is a journey into a level of violence that defies the stepmother label Letecia so prized. It was a trifecta of brutality. She used a knife, a firearm, and a blunt object. Gannon was stabbed 18 times. Defensive wounds on his hands and arms told the story of a boy trying to catch the blade. Trying to push away the woman who was supposed to be his mother. Then came the gunshot, a .22 caliber round fired into his jaw at close range. Finally, there was the blunt force trauma to his head, a blow so severe it fractured his skull. It wasn't just a murder, it was an execution fueled by a frantic, narcissistic rage. Letecia wasn't just killing a boy, she was trying to erase him. Then came the cold industrial aftermath. While Gannon's body lay in the room, Letecia didn't collapse in horror or regret. Instead, she went to work. The cleanup was as calculated as the crime. She moved furniture with a strength born of adrenaline, shifting the heavy bed to hide the massive bloodstains that had soaked through the carpet and into the subflooring. She used gallons of vinegar and water, scrubbing the walls, the baseboards, and then the mattress. She flipped the heavy mattress, hoping the clean side would deceive any casual glance. She was a woman who had spent her life manipulating perceptions, and now she was trying to manipulate the very physics of a crime scene. Her phone, always an extension of her ego, remained active throughout the afternoon. Between the stabs and the scrubbing, she was searching. She wasn't looking for help. She was searching for how to get a husband to love you again, and I hate my life in Colorado. She was even texting Al, maintaining the fiction of a normal day, telling him Gannon was resting and that she was busy with chores. The sheer cognitive dissonance required to type a heart emoji while standing in a room painted with the blood of her husband's son is the true measure of the monster behind the mask. As the sun began to set over the Rockies, Letecia had one final grotesque task. She couldn't leave the evidence in the bedroom. She needed a container. She chose a large, hard-side suitcase, a piece of luggage meant for vacations and new beginnings. She forced Gannon's small, battered body into the confined space, zipping it shut on the boy who had once been Gannon the Great. She then moved the suitcase to the garage, hiding it in plain sight, tucked away like unwanted storage. At 6:55 p.m., she finally made the call that would start the clock on the public investigation. Her voice was a masterpiece of manufactured panic. She told the dispatcher that Gannon had gone to a friend's house around 3:15 p.m. and hadn't returned. She painted a picture of a concerned parent, a woman worried about the dark streets and the cold wind. She spoke about his learning disabilities and how he might have gotten lost. It was her opening night, her first performance in a play that she intended to lead for months. She stood in that house, the scent of vinegar and bleach stinging her nostrils, and invited the world to help her find the boy she knew was already gone. The police who arrived that night didn't see the blood under the bed or the suitcase in the garage. They saw a distraught woman in a suburban home, a father away on duty, and a missing boy. They saw the mask. But as the temperature dropped into the negatives outside, the heat of Letecia's secret was already beginning to melt the ice she had tried to build around her crime. The stage was set, the cameras were coming, and the actress was ready for her close-up, oblivious to the fact that Gannon's spirit was already whispering the truth through the very walls she had tried so hard to clean. As the first light of Tuesday morning touched the snow-covered peaks of the Front Range, the community of Colorado Springs woke to a nightmare. The news of an 11-year-old boy missing from the quiet, safe streets of Lorson Ranch spread with the speed of a winter gale. For the residents of the area, this wasn't just a headline, it was a call to arms. Gannon Stauch, a boy described by everyone as a beacon of kindness, had vanished. The initial narrative, dictated by Letecia to the El Paso County Sheriff's Office, was simple. Gannon had walked out of the house between 3:15 p.m. and 4 p.m. on Monday to go to a friend's house and never came back. While hundreds of volunteers braved sub-zero temperatures to comb through drainage ditches, open fields, and thickets of scrub oak, Letecia began her most elaborate performance yet. She didn't stay on the sidelines. She inserted herself into the center of the investigation, not as a grieving parent, but as a victim of public scrutiny. Her behavior from the very beginning was a study in psychological deflection. While the community was looking for a child, Letecia was looking for an audience. As the days bled into a week, the runaway story began to buckle under the weight of reality. Neighbors started checking their own surveillance feeds, and the first major crack in the mask appeared. A neighbor's Nest camera had captured Gessia's red Nissan Titan backing out of the driveway on Monday morning. The footage clearly showed Gannon getting into the vehicle, his movements sluggish and pained, but when the truck returned hours later, Gannon was nowhere to be seen. When confronted with this evidence by investigators, Letecia didn't panic. She pivoted. She claimed the camera was tricky and that Gannon had actually gotten out on the other side, or perhaps she had taken him to a store and he had returned home later. It was a dizzying display of gaslighting delivered with a defensive, almost indignant tone. By the end of the first week, the FBI and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children had joined the search. The case had transitioned from a local missing person report to a national sensation. Al Stauch, who had rushed back from Oklahoma, was a man hollowed out by grief, standing in stark contrast to his wife. While Al pleaded with the public for Gannon's safe return, Letecia began giving a series of bizarre, high-profile media interviews. In one particularly infamous local news segment, Letecia sat with her back to the camera, her voice high-pitched and filtered through a layer of manufactured outrage. She didn't talk about Gannon's favorite toys or his infectious laugh. Instead, she spoke about herself. She complained about the keyboard warriors on social media who were questioning her story. She lamented the rumors that were hurting her reputation as an educator. She even demanded an apology from the public, claiming she had been a model stepmother for years. The disconnect was jarring. To the viewers watching at home, it felt like they were watching a B-movie actress who had forgotten her lines and was trying to improvise her way out of a corner. When the runaway theory failed to stick, Letecia introduced a new, more sinister character into her script, a man named Eduardo. She told investigators a convoluted story about a mysterious Hispanic man who had broken into the house, raped her, and then kidnapped Gannon. She claimed she hadn't reported it because she was scared and ashamed. However, there was no evidence of a break-in, no forensic trace of this mysterious intruder, and her own phone records showed no calls for help. Only a series of mundane texts to Al and searches for how to leave her marriage. As the search intensified, the community's hope began to turn into a cold, hard suspicion. Blue ribbons were tied to every tree and mailbox in Lorson Ranch, a symbol of Gannon the Great. But the atmosphere had soured. People weren't just looking for Gannon anymore. They were watching Letecia. Every time she stepped out of her house, she was met with the silent, judging eyes of a neighborhood that no longer believed a word she said. The perfect stepmother had become the local pariah. The search efforts themselves were grueling. Search and rescue teams used sonar to check frozen ponds and deployed drones to scan the vast, empty stretches of the Colorado plains. They found nothing. No clothing, no footprints, no sign of the 11-year-old boy. The silence from the landscape was deafening. Inside the command center, detectives were reaching the same conclusion as the public. Gannon hadn't walked away. He had been taken away. The tension reached a breaking point when the sheriff's office executed a search warrant on the Stauch home. While Letecia sat in a patrol car, investigators used luminol to light up the master bedroom. What they found was a slaughterhouse hidden beneath a layer of bleach. Despite her frantic scrubbing, Gannon's blood had seeped deep into the carpet fibers and the wooden subfloor. The candlefire story was revealed for what it truly was, a preemptive strike to explain away the scent of smoke or the sight of damage. Even as the evidence mounted, Letecia maintained her defiance. She moved out of the Colorado home and fled to South Carolina, claiming she was being persecuted by the local authorities. She continued to post on social media, using various aliases to defend herself and attack Gannon's biological mother, Landon Hyatt. Her narcissism was a shield she refused to drop, even as the walls of the investigation were closing in. The search for Gannon Stauch had become a search for a ghost. The community of Colorado Springs was left in a state of suspended animation, half mourning, half waiting for the other shoe to drop. The blue ribbons began to fade in the wind, but the resolve to find Gannon never wavered. The actress had taken her show on the road, but she had left behind a trail of blood and broken trust that no amount of performance could ever erase. The stage was shifting from the snowy streets of Colorado to the humid woods of the Southeast, as the investigation followed the path of a suitcase driven across the heart of America. The investigation into the disappearance of Gannon Stauch shifted from a frantic search for a runaway to a grim pursuit of a killer the moment the threshold of the master bedroom was crossed. While Letecia continued to spin her tales to the media, forensic technicians were discovering the physical realities she had tried so desperately to scrub away. Using chemical reagents that reveal hidden traces of protein, the room lit up with the silent testimony of Gannon's final moments. Blood was found on the walls, the baseboards, and soaked deep into the carpet and the wooden subflooring beneath. The candle lighting accident Letecia had reported was revealed as a calculated preemptive strike. An attempt to explain away the damage she knew she couldn't fully hide. The facade began to crumble further when detectives scrutinized the neighbor's surveillance footage with professional precision. The video from the morning of January 27th showed Gannon getting into Letecia's red Nissan Titan at 10:13 a.m., moving with a heavy, pained gait that suggested he was already injured or drugged. When the truck returned at 2:19 p.m., Letecia pulled into the garage, but Gannon was never seen exiting the vehicle. This 4-hour window became the focal point of the investigation. Letecia's explanation, that Gannon had simply gotten out on the other side or that the camera had missed him, was dismissed by experts as a physical impossibility. As the forensic evidence mounted, Letecia made a move that signaled her desperation. She fled Colorado. Claiming she was being harassed and persecuted by local law enforcement, she drove halfway across the country to South Carolina. But she didn't travel alone. Investigators, tracking her movements through cellular data and highway cameras, realized she was following a path that led through several states. It was during this cross-country flight that she disposed of the most damning evidence of all. The breakthrough that the entire nation had been waiting for came not in the snowy plains of Colorado, but in the humid, wooded landscape of the Florida Panhandle. On March 17, 2020, a bridge inspection crew working on the Escambia River Bridge in Pace, Florida, noticed a discarded piece of luggage beneath the overpass. Inside a hard-side suitcase, wrapped in blankets and plastic, were the remains of Gannon Stauch. The discovery was a crushing blow to a community that had held onto a sliver of hope. But for investigators, it was the final piece of the puzzle. The autopsy provided a horrific roadmap of Letecia's brutality. Gannon had been stabbed 18 times, including defensive wounds on his hands that showed he had fought for his life. He had been shot in the jaw with a .22 caliber firearm and suffered a massive, skull-fracturing blow to the head. The level of violence was so extreme that it transcended a simple argument. It was a systematic execution of a child. Furthermore, Gannon's body showed signs of having been stored for some time before being moved, matching the timeline of Letecia's activities in the days following his disappearance. Digital evidence further dismantled the Dr. Stauch persona. Investigators recovered Letecia's deleted search history, which revealed a mind obsessed with her own perceived victimhood. In the weeks leading up to the murder, she had searched for "I hate my stepkids," "Why should I have to take care of my husband's son?" and "How to find a new life in South Carolina." On the day of the murder, while Gannon lay dying or dead in the bedroom, she was searching for "How to get blood out of carpet" and "Can a house be tracked by GPS?" Her phone records also exposed the Eduardo story as a complete fabrication. There were no calls for help, no frantic messages to Al, and no evidence of any intruder entering the house. Instead, her phone showed her moving around the house and garage during the exact times she claimed she was being attacked. The GPS data from her truck placed her at the very bridge in Florida where Gannon's body was eventually found. She had driven over 1,400 miles with Gannon's body in the back of her truck, stopping at gas stations and motels, maintaining the mask of a distraught traveler while a child's remains were inches away. The most chilling aspect of the investigation was the recovery of a recorded phone call between Letecia and Al Stauch. In a desperate attempt to get her to confess, Al had cooperated with police, recording their conversations. During these calls, Letecia's voice would shift from a sobbing, wounded victim to a cold, calculating manipulator in a matter of seconds. She would berate Al for not supporting her, accusing him of choosing Gannon over her, even as he begged her for the truth. She never once expressed genuine remorse for Gannon. Her only concern was how the situation was affecting her reputation and her future. By the time Letecia was arrested in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, the facade had not just cracked, it had shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. The woman who had boasted of her PhD and her career as an elite educator was now a prisoner charged with first-degree murder of a child, child abuse resulting in death, and tampering with a deceased human body. The investigation had followed the trail of blood from a suburban bedroom in Colorado to a bridge in Florida, and at every turn, they found the fingerprints of a woman whose narcissism was so profound she believed she could rewrite reality itself. The trial of Letecia Stauch, which concluded in May 2023, was a descent into the final act of her self-authored tragedy. Faced with overwhelming forensic evidence, Gannon's blood in the bedroom and her GPS path to the Florida bridge, Letecia attempted to pivot to an insanity defense. She claimed to suffer from dissociative identity disorder, asserting that a shadow persona named Maria had committed the atrocities. However, the prosecution systematically dismantled this performance, presenting her calculated cleanup and 1,400-mile flight as evidence of a lucid mind attempting to escape justice. Experts testified that her actions were not those of a fractured psyche, but of a narcissist who viewed a child's life as an inconvenience. After years of delays and bizarre courtroom outbursts, the jury needed only hours to find her guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring her mask would remain behind bars forever. The sentencing of Letecia Stauch finally brought a heavy, somber silence to a case that had gripped the nation's conscience. While the actress begins her life sentence in a cell, the world remembers the boy who was far greater than the tragedy that claimed him. Gannon Stauch's legacy is not the suitcase or the bridge, but the Gannon the Great foundations and the blue ribbons that still flutter in Colorado, reminding us that even the most calculated mask cannot hide the light of a kind soul. Justice was served, but the void left by his infectious giggle remains a permanent scar on the heart of a community that refused to stop looking until he was found. If you are finished watching, you're a real true crime fan. Subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. See you in the next video.